Ukrainian officials say a convoy full of ammunition from Poland has just arrived. Now, this is the first publicly known shipment of military aid since the Russian invasion began.
And for the first time ever, NATO's response force has been activated. President Biden joined a NATO summit today for leaders to create a plan of action. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman is the former European Affairs Director for the National Security Council. He's also the author of Here, Right Matters, An American Story. Colonel Vindman, thanks so much for being here. The idea that the NATO response force has been activated for the first time ever, what does that mean?
Well, frankly, the question is, if not now, then when? It was designed to be a rapid reaction force in response to a crisis situation, in response to what we call a contingency. And that's exactly what we have unfolding. We have a major buildup of Russian forces on the boundary of NATO, and now there's a war that's going to have some consequences both militarily and amongst the civilian population with regards to refugee flows. And it would be irresponsible, it would be negligent to not activate the NATO response force to provide additional security for, again, the humanitarian issues, but as well as warning off Russia if even casting an eye in the direction of NATO or challenging NATO Article 5.
We mentioned the weapons that are coming in from Poland, but you wrote a piece for The Atlantic recently about what more America could have done. There was a member of the Ukrainian parliament on CNN today asking for air cover. You point out that the U.S. did not supply the Patriot anti-aircraft missiles. We know about an amphibious assault potentially. They're none of the Harpoon anti-ship weaponry either. What more should the U.S., in your perspective, do now that it hasn't done?
All that and more. Frankly, there's a historical precedent for this. During World War II, even before the U.S. was involved, when the Soviets and the Brits were facing off against the Nazis, we provided all sorts of equipment through Lend-Lease. We provided, it really enabled Britain to stay in the war and the Soviet Union to survive. We should be doing the same thing now for the Ukrainian people, for the Ukrainian armed forces. Pushing as many supplies as they need, whatever they want in terms of a wish list, give them so that they can continue to fight, continue to defend themselves, frankly, to continue to defend NATO and European interests just outside of NATO. Because next step is really right up against NATO's shores. That's where Russia would push up to. But we also need to think beyond that. We need to think to economic. Marshall Plan, it's another historical precedence rather. We give the Ukrainian people what they need to rebuild, because there will be a time to rebuild. We should start talking about that now. The tens of billions of dollars that need to be poured into Ukraine to make sure Ukraine survives, and that Russia's aspirations of achieving a failed state in Ukraine don't materialize. We deny that to Russia. That's what we should be thinking about. That's what we should be talking about now. And what I am afraid of is I see a bit of a defeatist attitude, that this is a foregone conclusion, the Russians are going to win, that there's not that much we can do. I don't think that's true. I was quite pessimistic before, when in the days before this started. But the Ukrainians have been putting up a significant fight, and this is not going away. This is not going to be a withdrawal scenario. The Russians are going to have to stay because the Ukrainians will not be pacified. So this is going to be playing out over a longer period of time unless there's a diplomatic solution.
Colonel, I want to hear more about that, because you have a personal connection to all of this. I mean, you lived and worked, you had assignments in Kyiv, you know that city well. And so what are your thoughts as you've watched these past 72 hours unfold there?
I mean, I get the chills right now just thinking about it. Yeah, my family roots are from that part of the world. I left when I was 3.5 years old. I had the privilege of going back there as an Army officer for some language immersion, and then for a year working out at the embassy, and had a chance to travel and experience Ukraine extensively. It's a wonderful, warm people. I've had the fortune to come back to Ukraine as part of official delegations, as part of the president's delegation to Zelensky's inauguration when I first met him, President Zelensky, and he's matured, pretty amazing individual, resilient and mature. But I also take the opportunity every time I'm back there to visit my mother's grave. She passed away before we had managed to leave when I was a toddler, and my grandmother's grave. And this is where their fighting is occurring now, on the outskirts of the city. And it's really difficult to see. It's difficult to watch, and it's difficult to understand how we got to this point. But that's why I wrote that piece in the Atlantic, because we had some wishful thinking about our policy towards Russia. This is the opportunity to really start with a blank slate, understand what our challenges are, and move forward, make sure that our national security doesn't get further undermined here in the U.S.
Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, we really appreciate getting your perspective.